The fragile link between Apple's headquarters in California and the vast factory networks across China is no longer just a case study in global supply chains. It's now a geopolitical flashpoint. With over 90% of iPhones still assembled in Shenzhen, each product rollout strengthens China's industrial engine while deepening America's strategic unease. As Apple and China grow more economically entangled, the question arises, can Apple truly untangle itself from Beijing's grip? Or has the trillion-dollar interdependence grown too deep to unwind? Apple's journey to China began not with strategy, but desperation. In the late 1990s, Apple was facing bankruptcy. Its insistence on proprietary components and US-based manufacturing clashed with the global industry's shift toward cheaper, standardized mass production. After a series of factory closures in California and short-lived experiments in Mexico, Apple turned to Southeast Asia. This path led it to Taiwan's electronics giants and eventually to Foxconn, a Taiwanese company eager to expand in mainland China. Beijing welcomed this with open arms, offering Foxconn generous incentives, tax breaks, land, and credit to build sprawling facilities along China's coast. Apple had found its lifeline, and China had found a catalyst for its industrial ambitions. Foxconn's early factories in Shenzhen began modestly but quickly transformed into factory cities employing hundreds of thousands of workers. Apple's growing demand fueled expansion, with Foxconn investing heavily in assembly lines tailored for Apple's products. When the iMac G3, with its bright plastic shell, became a hit, Foxconn went all in. The iPod's global success further cemented the partnership. By the time the iPhone launched in 2007, Foxconn had built multi-story facilities and secured low-interest loans to accommodate massive production needs. The Chinese government supported this growth enthusiastically, viewing Apple as a prestige client. Cheap labor, long hours, and tight quarters defined the production environment. Apple benefited from low costs, while Foxconn's technical capacity soared. This partnership didn't just lower costs. It built a generation of skilled Chinese engineers. Apple's U.S. teams regularly traveled to Shenzhen, sharing expertise in battery design, circuit manufacturing, and robotic assembly. Over time, these skills were absorbed by Foxconn and its subcontractors. They began producing for local brands with the same precision they offered Apple. Chinese manufacturing evolved rapidly, adopting Apple's playbook to build its own tech champions. The transformation was so profound that China credited Apple with helping it escape the middle-income trap, transitioning into a high-tech manufacturing powerhouse. But such growth came with controversy. Reports of long workdays, low wages, and exploited practices at Foxconn's factories sparked international criticism. Tragic suicides among workers highlighted the cost of cheap electronics. Apple responded with audits, new worker programs, and public pledges, but systemic issues persisted. For Beijing, however, Apple remained a valuable partner. The Communist Party saw Apple not only as a source of revenue, but also as a lever for national development. Apple's influence extended far beyond factory floors. Its investments trained engineers, developed infrastructure, and strengthened China's technological foundation. China's growing middle class soon became a lucrative market for Apple. iPhones became symbols of status, and local sales exploded. When revenue from China crossed $60 billion annually, Apple gave the region strategic priority. However, with this came risk. Chinese regulators began scrutinizing foreign tech companies more aggressively. Apple found itself in the crosshairs during a consumer rights scandal in 2013 and was forced to issue a public apology and adjust its policies. Internally, Apple created a task force called the Gang of Eight to manage relations with Beijing. From storing iCloud data on Chinese servers to removing certain apps from the App Store, Apple made clear its intention to comply with local rules, sometimes drawing criticism from abroad for conceding to censorship. Despite efforts to diversify, Apple's dependency on China remains immense. Nearly all iPhones are assembled in the country. Its chips are made by Taiwan's TSMC, and most of its key components come from Chinese suppliers. The U.S. government, recognizing this vulnerability, has increased pressure on Apple to shift production elsewhere. Tariffs introduced during the Trump administration and incentives offered under Biden's CHIPS and Science Act aim to bring manufacturing back to America. But the reality is stubborn. No other country matches China's manufacturing scale, skilled workforce, or logistical infrastructure. Apple has begun moving some assembly to India and Vietnam. Yet, experts agree, completely relocating the supply chain would take a decade. The specialized machines used to craft iPhones, many of which are embedded in Chinese factories, are not easy to extract. In fact, China considers some of this equipment as strategic assets, requiring customs approval for removal, a process often delayed or blocked entirely. Meanwhile, alternative markets like India struggle with infrastructure gaps and labor issues, making it difficult to replicate China's efficiency anytime soon. Beijing, too, holds cards in this high-stakes game. It could revoke assembly licenses, restrict component imports, or rally consumers to support domestic brands. Apple knows such moves would cost billions. That's why it continues to appease Chinese regulators and protect its position in the market. At the same time, China benefits enormously from Apple's presence. It's estimated that over 28 million Chinese engineers were trained through Apple's supply chain ecosystem. These workers are now instrumental to Beijing's ambitions, from smartphones to drones, and even military tech. This overlap between Apple's supply network and China's defense capabilities has sparked sharp criticism. As the U.S. warns of rising threats from Beijing, observers point out how Silicon Valley's intellectual capital has helped build the very technologies now being used to challenge American dominance. Every Apple device produced in China inadvertently strengthens the infrastructure that supports China's hypersonic missiles, surveillance systems, surveillance systems, surveillance systems, surveillance systems, and fighter jets. Ultimately, Apple's initial move to China may have saved it from collapse. But that decision has since grown into a strategic dependency that carries geopolitical risks for both sides. Apple wants to diversify its supply chain, but lacks immediate alternatives. China wants to retain Apple, but knows the relationship is a bargaining chip in broader U.S.-China tensions. As the world's most valuable tech company navigates this tightrope, the global balance of power quietly shifts beneath it. The question is no longer whether Apple will leave China, but whether it ever truly can.